Hi, Kritika. How are you?
Hi, I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm so excited to have you on. Could you start by introducing yourself and telling us about Henning Larsen and your position there?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Kritika Kharbanda. I'm currently working as the lead sustainability specialist for Henning Larsen Architects at the New York office. Henning Larsen is a Scandinavian firm. We do architecture, urbanism, landscape. We have around 8 offices around the globe. I'm working in the New York office. Prior to that, I was in the Denmark office for 3 years. I've been with the firm for almost 4 years now. Uh, and we are more than 800 people globally.
Okay, so why don't you tell us, as a lead sustainability specialist, what do you do? And why is this position important for design firms and construction companies?
I always love to answer that question. My role is coming in early on all the build or urban scale projects, all the construction projects, and trying to push the needle towards making the projects that we do with our clients more sustainable. A lot of the times it's putting on different hats in this role. So sometimes it's me educating clients on why they need to do sustainability as a bigger umbrella. Several times there we come across clients that already had these ambitions. So it's on me to help ensure that all the team, all the stakeholders involved, so the architecture firm, the consultants, everyone else is on board, and we make sure that we reach the visions that we set up front. And a lot of times, my role is basically to act as a peacemaker between the construction team, the consultants, and the architects, and ensuring that everyone gets their voice while being on the path to achieving this sustainability vision. So I explain to people that half side of my brain understands architecture, design, creativity, and the other half is more on the engineering side, understanding simulations, analysis, quantifying the impact of what we do as architects at Henning Larsen. The role is super important because if we don't have someone in my position, things can get haywire very easily from a sustainability forefront. So let's say if the client brief that we get includes being net zero and we don't have someone in my position, it's very difficult to achieve that because we need to ensure that things go smoothly across every project stages and everyone buys into the sustainability vision and make sure we meet the metrics across the CD, SD, ED stages, and so on.
Okay. So I love a few things that kind of you said. I'm going to pick at it if you don't mind, but you said that you're a peacemaker, and it's an interesting position. I haven't heard of, but what would you say are maybe even a few examples, like what is the most challenging part of that, and also where do you find the strength to deal with the peacemaking? Sounds like there's a lot of there's it sounds like there's a lot of challenges.
I would say, so some examples that I've seen, I think sometimes we come across clients, and this is a very rare example, and don't hold it against me, but sometimes we get clients who know what climate change is, but don't want to act on it because there are no policies. Let's say if you're working in a project in the US or one of the countries that doesn't have policies, they don't want to do anything on it. But they do feel the changes because of the extremes of climate, because of climate change, the huge wave coming in. So a lot of times I have to fight to make a project sustainable and look at these small impacts that we can make without having the project cost a huge amount of money to make those changes. A lot of times people see sustainability as a standalone service, and when the cost budgeting comes in, that's the first thing that gets cut out of a project. So one example is we were doing this project in Texas. It was a lab building where we put in timber, like a hybrid timber structure as compared to a conventional RCC structure. And as soon as the cost came in, this was in the early stages. As soon as the cost came in, the timber went out because apparently there was a difference of almost 3 million in terms of doing timber structure versus the RCC structure. So obviously that is a big cost when you look at the whole project, but it's difficult because you have to choose your battles and understand, okay, this doesn't make sense from a cost perspective, but what else can we do? So it's a lot on, I would say, fighting for sustainability, but sometimes educating the clients on why it's important and then also making sure that the project budget stays the way it's supposed to be.
If I'm understanding correctly, you're trying to continuously find that balance of how you're able to implement this solution, but in a way that appeases everybody and that
Right.
fits with the requirements of the project. So another thing you said is you're dealing a lot with quantifying the results or the value of and measuring the
Hmm.
results and value of the products. And I know that's a big point of it's very complicated because it's
Right.
a lot of times for these products, either you have to wait a lot longer to see the actual results. So it's a
Mhm.
lot of estimate. Like, how do you go about this? It's very tricky.
I think you need to have, it's more of a skill question, but also understanding how different countries deal with quantifying different measures. So I did my master's at Harvard Graduate School of Design, specializing in energy and environment. And I took some courses there that helped me navigate the different, let's say, emission factors if I have to dive into the nitty gritties of making these calculations. So a lot of the times, the skills that we require are understanding what, let's say, operational carbon is, operational energy is, embodied carbon or embodied energy is, what is life cycle assessment, and how do you go about making these calculations. So first and foremost, I think someone needs to have the passion to dive into these nitty-gritties. It's a complicated process. And obviously, that has to be combined with technical knowledge. So, understanding the environmental understanding and the simulation skills.
Okay, cool. We're gonna move on because I'm scared that we're gonna get technical. So, what would you say? What's the greatest challenge that you face in your role? What the greatest challenges?
Mm, So, I would say the greatest challenge would obviously be seeing sustainability as something which is not a part of the project and it's its own entity. The how we work at Henning Larsen is that it has to be integrated. I am not someone who's selling a separate service. I'm very much a part of the project team, but not a lot of firms believe in that philosophy. So a lot of times we don't really incorporate sustainable measures from day zero or day one of the project. And that doesn't, so if a client has, let's say, net zero energy goals, if you don't incorporate the principles from day zero, they don't get implemented. So the greatest challenge would be understanding that it's not a separate thing. And someone in my role, I know I have people at different firms in my capacity working there and saying that they have to fight battles within the firm to convince the colleagues themselves on why their role is important. At least I don't see that being an issue with me, but that is a big challenge out there that people have started to realize that sustainability is important. Even tech firms like Google, Amazon's have someone who is the sustainability lead working on how to decarbonize their own portfolio. So the understanding on why it's important and then why it has to be integrated is something that people should realize very early on.
Very interesting. So there's this misperception or kind of perception challenge where people aren't recognizing that sustainability isn't just like a nice to have, but it's an inherent part
Right.
of the process. Okay, really
Exactly.
interesting. And what are the three most important skills or qualities that are required to be a great lead sustainability specialist?
I'd start with, but I don't see this as a skill, but it's more of an ambition and passion question. Someone who's in the field needs, and I also don't believe in this, but I've heard people say that they've found their calling or they see that when they create an impact, it helps being in this position. So I feel that someone who is deeply and truly motivated to make remediations on their impact for the environment should be in this position. Someone who feels that they are doing some good work, they are creating an impact through their field. I think that is very necessary to have for this position. Obviously, we talked about the technical skills. So, having the knowledge on quantifying this, how do you look at the policies, map the economic trade offs while looking at the carbon and energy calculations at the same time? So, looking at different metrics and trying to bring them all together, that is a technical skill that you need to have. But also, I feel people underestimate the softer skills that are needed. So my role needs there is a huge emphasis on storytelling and communication. If I have to tell my clients on why this is important, I need to be able to convince them through stories on why they should do it and how does it impact them, maybe not now, but in the 5, 10, 50 years from now. So breaking down the technical findings from the technical skills, but also making them easier to understand for the people that I'm speaking with every day who are not in my position, who don't specialize in this is super important, I think.
I think it's always like the soft skills are always for some overlooked.
Yeah, if I tell my clients that this piece of wood has like 1 ton CO2, what does it actually mean for them? Unless I say, maybe that relates to cutting down X number of trees from the forest near your house. And they won't really understand the impact if it's just looking at CO2. It's so ambiguous, the numbers itself.
Yeah. So we'll move on to the next question, which is what is your perspective on construction technology? And does Henning Larsen have any processes in place when it comes to technology adoption?
Right. I am a firm believer that we heavily need construction tech, innovation, R&D, also did D&I that kind of taps into the whole construction tech to advance the needle in sustainability. At Henning Larsen, we have a bunch of different avenues and processes in place. In Copenhagen, we have a dedicated R&D team that looks at both the D&I side of things, but also the hard tech, construction, light fabrication, and manufacturing innovation processes. So what we do is basically we are a part of this bigger foundation. It's a Ramboll Foundation, and the foundation offers different grants. So our team works with different academic partners or NGOs or firms doing innovative work. It could also be the developer clients that we are working with to do experiments on, for example, low carbon concrete. We have an industrial PhD right now working out of Copenhagen. She'll actually be in the US for 3 months. She's doing a residency at University of Michigan soon. And she's working with additive manufacturing for preparing infrastructural projects and looking at adaptive reuse, but for infrastructural projects, which is quite innovative. We're looking at adaptive reuse for old commercial buildings, but this is a very different angle of using additive manufacturing. Other than that, we also have personally, I am also involved in construction tech and innovation. I co founded a startup which was initially called Cardinal LCA back in my grad school days. It's evolved now. I've transitioned more on the advisory board team. It's called Pathways now, and they're working to develop EPDs, which are basically, it's essentially called Environment Product Declaration. So it's a document that material manufacturers produce to tell what is the impact of producing a certain material on the environment. It's basically like when you read a chocolate, like when you buy a chocolate bar, on the back you see the calories associated with it. So it's very similar to something for a physical product that we use in buildings. So Pathways team is using AI to help manufacturers produce these documents faster and quicker with low cost. And I know that a lot of people in my firm who are a part of this R&D team, I've invested in these different startups and venues. The partner at our firm, Jacob Stroman, he is one of the investors in an acoustics simulation based startup that is looking at making acoustics visible. So combining the simulation side of acoustics with gaming technology. So we help our clients see acoustics through a mixed reality medium. So a lot of people in the R&D team are involved externally, but also internally that helps foster a culture of innovation and then allows people to do things beyond just what the projects tell us to do.
Okay. So that sounds fascinating. It sounds also like the entire team has a sense of ingenuity and kind of people are interested in finding ways like visualizing materials that aren't usually, that's really interesting because like you're saying, it tells part of that story or pathways, which is interesting. And I'd love to dive a little bit more into that and the work that you've been doing and also the realization potentially of I want to also work with a big firm. Like that dynamic sounds also very interesting. Why don't you share a little
Mhm,
bit about both about why got you passionate about it, what's the
mhm.
solution you guys are trying to provide, and then also how you transitioned and how that transition is feeling and affects you?
Sure. Pathways initially was called Cardinal LCA, and it was born out of a need to basically perform life cycle assessment, which is what LCA stands for. This was through 3 years ago when there were not a lot of tools that helped architects do LCA in an integrated manner. And this was actually incubated while I was at Henning Larsen because I saw a need that we don't have tools to calculate the emissions from an embodied carbon perspective in the buildings that we do very early on. There were tools, but they were super complicated for later stages when the design decisions had already been made on what materials to use. So it was difficult to change any sort of material specification. And that's why this calculation needed to be done very early on. I had a different co-founder back then. It's also challenging when you're first time founder working with someone who was international. She was based out here in the US. It was COVID time. So a lot of things had to be taken care of across different geographies. We had a team which was working in India. We were 5 people. After coming to the US to do my grad school, we went through a series of changes. We ended up getting into the Techstars, which is an accelerator for early stage startups. And at that time, I had a fallout with my co-founder because she didn't want to continue with it. She was graduating and she found a role that was more suited. She wanted to take a step back. There was a series of going through different co-founders, experimenting with different people. The visions did not match. Sometimes the skill sets did not match. And sometimes it was just the why that did not match until I met my now co-founders for Pathways. And we did a hustle for the last 6 months of my grad school and it felt like family. But also to say that I was doing this for a much longer time than they were. I was exhausted and I just wanted to take a step back, but still continue and help build the vision that we all had that now is called Pathways. So decided to take a step back, came back to Henning Larsen. And this role is also something which is Henning Larsen is fairly new in New York. We've been here for 5 years. So it feels like a startup still without the implication of constant fundraising. So I get to do what I love doing, but as a founder, I felt like I was constantly fundraising and I'm fine with doing that, but I felt like I wasn't using my skills to the best capacity.
And so shifting to be an advisor versus being fully immersed in the tech in the company, how would that feel? And then also you're really describing the entrepreneurial journey, which is not an easy one and
Right.
full of challenges. It's what would you say right now from the place that you're at? First of all, what's it like to be as an advisor? And two, what's the insights that you have now for the founders and other players that are in the space still?
Right. I think now the role that I am right now with Pathways, I feel I'm much more better positioned to help them with my connections through Henning Larsen. The company also pivoted based on the client base that we had from at Cardinal LCA, that was more architects, which was my field mostly, than now, which is mostly manufacturers, which is not what I am trained in or comfortable with. So now that I am working at an architecture firm, being an advisor for Pathways, I can help connect them to manufacturers because I am the manufacturer's client and I'm the one specifying their product in all my projects. So it just feels that I'm well positioned to support the company by taking on this role, but also just like stepping back. I feel that being a full-time founder or just being in a startup, it's like a marathon. It's not a race. So people have to pace themselves, otherwise they'll burn out. And I think that's what happened to me because I was doing grad school, I was building a startup, I was also doing a lot of R&D projects on the side, the teaching assistant side. So just ensuring that you really fit in the company. And I did fit in the company for the first 2 years, but after the pivot, it just didn't make sense in terms of what we were looking at.
Okay. There's so much more to dive into, but we'll move on to the next question. And what are the greatest hurdles that are holding back innovation in the construction industry?
I think it's a different challenge for every region, like every geographical region, every country that we're talking about. Here in the US, I would say it's a lot on the policies and regulations because they're just not there yet. Um, there are a lot of innovations happening, but every developer is scared to be the first one to help scale the innovation happening and actually use that in a physical, scale it up and use it in a physical project. So for us, we have to ensure that there is a robust pipeline to ensure the scalability of an innovation. For example, I've been speaking with folks working with different sorts of innovations around low carbon concrete. Some of them are working with a very basic example, replacing the slag content and using basically using fly ash in their concrete. But the issue is that there is not enough fly ash sometimes because fly ash is a byproduct of steel industry. So just ensuring that every piece works efficiently is important. And this leads to the procurement issues. In the US, we are way behind in, let's say, wood construction, which used to be an innovation, but now it's started to become almost a norm. But the issue is that you can't really get wood easily in the US. There are some regions like Portland, or you can import from Canadian regions. But a lot of the times we have to specify, if we specify wood, it has to be imported from Europe. So there are emissions associated with transporting the product. So is it really us being innovative in a project if we are adding so many emissions to it? So it's a different balance. So I would say overall, just to answer the question very straightforwardly, it's policies and regulations, pipeline to ensure the scalability, and then also looking at procurement that it's easy enough to do that.
Okay. Really interesting. And so I didn't say this, but I was once in Copenhagen and I visited there because of a 3D printing company, and we
Uh-huh.
dove into the additives, which is like the secret sauce in general of the 3D printing industry. But it is so interesting because a lot of these materials, they really need to meet the scale of supply. And a lot of them,
Right.
and that's a challenge for a really growing market.
Right.
It reminds me of a conversation I had a while back with a very large player in the Middle East, that they were at the beginning, they were asking for these different supplies, or even they didn't want to produce any waste. And so they're
Mm-hmm.
asking contractors to take that waste. And at
Mm-hmm.
the beginning, it was a cost, it was an add on cost because these contractors didn't want to take it. They had enough budget because they have an element that's focused on sustainability to tell the contractors to do it. And so the contractors did at the beginning at pay. But at some point, it turned around where they created this whole new market that was based off the waste that they were producing.
Mm-hmm.
And
Right.
now they literally pay to take the waste from the company. So the stories could have a good ending, but there's some challenges. Mm.
Exactly.
So, how can the industry overcome hurdles that are preventing its growth?
I would say for us, we try to find very smart, strategic niches that help us allow scalability and innovation of projects. So the example that I said with low carbon concrete, for example, we try to look at, okay, maybe we can't use this product across the whole structure of a project, but where can we find smaller ways to incorporate this product in our project so that we can help the startup get at examples on where and how their product has been used. So we look at spaces that are hidden from the human eye and try to convince the clients that, hey, we have tested this product. It works from a stability perspective and it works from everything else, the VOC content, the indoor environmental quality. We should try to use it here. And then we specify that product and it works. So it's just looking at these smaller and smarter strategic ways to to help scale basically these things. And I would say it's also to help take active part on furthering the local codes and sustainability initiatives. There are lots of roundtables happening here. It's to help get exposure to these innovations happening. I was at the New York Build recently. There were tons of startups that had not scaled the product yet, but they were in testing, prototyping phase. So making sure that they get a smoother path to scale the innovations that they've been doing. But also, I would appreciate venues like the New Lab here in Brooklyn. There's a lot going on at the Brooklyn Army Terminal, which is through the New York City Economic Development Corporation. So they have an open call for startups to some work at a space and scaling their technology. So there are these government funded or private, like public private partnership funded avenues as well that are helping move the needle. So I guess the industry needs to change in order to basically adapt the innovations that are coming up.
Okay. That's great. And what do you think the future of construction looks like, and how can technology help shape that future?
It's definitely, we are looking at way past the construction that we used to look at. And I know this is just like one way of looking at it, but I can break it down more from a construction and maybe sustainability perspective, because that's where I work in. But we've been seeing a lot of like faster deliveries using AI for on-site detection, quicker feedback on the construction processes, and also work delivery. We've been seeing drone inspections on site, but also integrating the AR and VR to get at this mixed reality. I was speaking with someone who's working a lot with generative AI for construction tech. And like we've been experimenting with smaller things, but which have obviously scaled up in certain regions versus the others. So looking at robotic arm manufacturing for prototyping. And we've been doing a lot of like modular construction as well. On the sustainability forefront, we've been doing a lot of design for disassemblies, approaching buildings as a kit of parts that you can disassemble and ensuring that the waste that goes after the life of building has ended, they can be like streamlined into different cycles. We've been looking at material passports for tracking the end of life for each material on how they go to different avenues. Also looking at strategic sources of marking, foreseeing issues on what can stop the procurement or the construction technology being implemented early on through AI and solving for that. So I've been seeing a lot of these modern innovations that have seen the life, I would say, in certain regions, but US, I would say it's still behind. There's a lot of money definitely moving in climate tech innovation. It's a booming space. There's a lot of companies looking at hard tech innovations, but it's yet to be implemented in full scale capacity, at least in the build side of things.
Great. And I have a question. If I am a startup, because there's going to be some founders watching this video, how do I go and try working with you guys? How do I work with Henning Larsen? Well, how should they get in touch?
Reach out. My email is publicly available on the website. I am very active on LinkedIn, Instagram. Just reach out. Every time I've been having a lot of conversations with startups, and the goal is to help connect them either with folks who can help them further, or making sure that we find an avenue for them to work with us, with our clients, with some consultants that I'm connected with or my colleagues are connected with. The first and foremost, reaching out, being visible is super important for startups. And I know sometimes that's an issue because you're in the process of innovation. You want to keep it hush, but you also want to make sure that you make the technology visible in front of the right people who can help you get to the next stages.
Okay, so if you guys are listening to this, reach out, and we'll also make sure that your email is also in the comments. People could reach out. And so we are coming up towards the end of the podcast. What advice would you give to construction professionals that are interested in leading change in their companies?
I think I'll give two very contrasting pieces of advice. I am a hustler. Unfortunately, I don't have to be ashamed and I can admit that. But I also want to say that like times are changing. So I know back then it was believed that you have to be very good in one niche and just follow that. But what I've been seeing a lot is even from like Cardinal to Pathways now at my position at Henning Larsen, it's good now to be a jack of all trades versus being a master of one thing. I think you need to have a bunch of different skills because you need to have the technical knowledge in your own field, but you also have to know how to communicate, market yourself, market your startup, and try to be visible, make connections with the right people. You have to have a bunch of different skills. And I feel people listening to this just try to go beyond what the job description says or what you think the job description should say. That being said, I also want to say that for those in my capacity who are trying to spearhead changes within their organization or building something of their own, it's going to be a new battle every day. So I would just tell you to be patient, be calm, and also remember that you have to take time for yourself, because it's very important sometimes to just step back and take a deep breath and head into the next battle with a clearer, calmer mind.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much for getting on the podcast. I really enjoy this. You had amazing insights. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elia. I'm really looking forward to this.